Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome into the Civic Awareness Series. If I could have everyone in the room's attention, we're going to get started. Oh, those are our online guests. Welcome into the Civic Awareness Series with the Schaumburg Library and the League of Women Voters. We are so proud to be continuing this series with all of our friends here in person and, of course, our online audience as well. This is our first year doing the Civic Awareness Series with the League of Women Voters, and we're wrapping up our 2024 season. Yay! Which means there's no Civic Awareness Series in December. Go have holiday fun. That's what the League intends to do, which is why we're not meeting. But we will be back. I know they're going to say this again at the end. It doesn't hurt to hear it twice. We will be back in January of 2025. We're moving the series from the second Tuesday of the month to the fourth Tuesday of the month. So when we meet in January, we'll be meeting on January 28th. 7 to 8 p.m., still in the Rasmussen room at the Schaumburg Library, and of course on Zoom. And our January session's really cool. We have WGN TV political analyst Paul Knizhnik. I have been asked, is that the gentleman with the bow tie? Yes, that's the gentleman with the bow tie. And he'll be giving us a post-election update, talking about the election results, how we got there, and where we can expect to be going within the next 4 years. We're really excited because we're partnering with 28 other libraries in Illinois to bring you this presentation with Mr. Knizhnik. So make sure you come out and join us for that one. We'll be hybrid, so here in person as well online. Now let's get us started. For our friends here in the room, if you could take this opportunity to silence all cell phones and other electronic devices you have. Noises and lights emitted by those devices are distracting to both your fellow patrons as well as our presenters, although probably not our one presenter who's virtual. She's probably fine from that. However, for our online audience, remember your cameras and microphones are off. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties during today's presentation, you can reach out to us using the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar. If Zoom is still giving you problems, I recommend you head over to the Schaumburg Library YouTube page where we are live streaming this, so you'll be able to also see it there as well. Sometimes that's more helpful when Zoom is being a little bit finicky. If you have questions, the Zoom audience, for our presenters, you are also welcome to throw those in the Q&A. We'll address all questions at the end of the presentation, and closed captions has been enabled for your convenience. For our online audience, if you are looking to ask some questions, you have been given some note cards and some pens by, where's my lovely friend, Sam, all the way in the back. She'll collect those and bring them to Janet, who will be helping facilitate the Q&A and asking the questions of our lovely knowledge experts this evening. So if you have questions, make sure you can throw, if you need a card, you need another card, throw your hand in the air, Sam will come and get those for you. So thank you so much. Without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to one of my partners from the League of Women Voters, Terry Gazowski.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Terry Gazowski. I'm the League of Women Voters Palatine, Barrington, Schaumburg area co-events director with Janet Sonoika, who will be monitoring Q&A, as Chris said. Thank you, Schaumburg Library and Chris Corrigan, in partnering with the League on the Civic Awareness Series every fourth Tuesday of the month in 2025. As indicated, we are moving to a new date. A little bit about the League. It's a nonpartisan political organization. Anyone can join or support the League in our mission of promoting civic engagement, voter education, and advocacy on various issues. You can learn more about the League and participation through the website in the chat, as we'll be posting that, as well as where to go and vote and learn more about civic awareness. We are over 100 years old, but welcome the energy of all ages and genders. Today, we welcome Jim McGrath, our specialist on gun prevention, and his guest speakers, Sarah Knizhnik, who is the chair Gun Violence Prevention Initiative for Lake County State's Attorney Office, and Maralea Negron, Director of Policy, Advocacy, and Research, the network advocating against domestic violence. We welcome our panelists in representing our session topic of gun violence prevention. I'll hand it off to Jim to kick us off now with our panelists and intros. Welcome.
Thanks, Terry. Appreciate it. So I'm going to try the microphone. I don't know if I need this or not, but we'll see. There we go. So I got involved with gun violence prevention after Sandy Hook. I was working from home. This thing came across my computer about all these young kids being shot. I just said then and there, I need to do something about this. Moms to Men Action was just being created. I found a group that was in Vernon Hills, organized by Sarah. So Sarah has been helping me for the years to keep myself on track. Oh, I'm too tall. I've done a lot of stuff. I got a Moms and Men Action group started in my hometown of Barrington, which we're still active in. We have a group called Be Smart, which is very active, and I would suggest that we do that presentation sometime for this group. So I'm going to move on to introducing. I'm going to let's see. There we go. So Maralea, who Tara did a short introduction for her and Sarah, but Maralea is where she needs to be. She's in Springfield advocating for Karina's bill. And she's going to go through in a little bit and explain to all of you the details of Karina's bill and why it's important. Sarah has been a gun violence prevention issues champion for what, a decade? That's how committed she is. So, and she is now, as you can see, chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative in Lake County, which she was able to convince the state's attorney to start, what, about a year ago?
We started in 2022.
Yep. So I'm going to turn this over to, where'd Chris go? Can you get Maralea back on?
Yeah.
Oh, Maralea, you're on.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Can you see me okay? Can you hear me? Can you see me? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you again for inviting me to be here. As Jim said, I am currently in Springfield, and we are here for the veto session. We're expected to be here for a couple days this week and a couple days next week. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and dive into the presentation that I have for you all. Okay, can you all see that? Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and go with yes.
Sorry, yes, I had us muted, so when everyone screamed yes.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. But again, my name is Maralea Negron, she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Policy Advocacy and Research at the network, and I'm here today to talk to you all a little bit about the background of domestic violence and gun violence, and why it's so important that we address this intersection, and to talk about our initiative, which is Karina's bill. So what is the network? The network advocating against domestic violence leads a coalition of organizations that are working to end gender-based violence. We have over 40 organizations in our network of direct service providers, largely based throughout Cook and some of the Collier counties. And we also operate the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline. So we have a lot of rich information via the hotline, the data we collect there, and also our survivor engagement there. And we do a lot of advocacy and training, and we do a lot of data collection, which I'm going to talk about throughout the presentation today as well. So individual risk of domestic gun violence homicide. I'm going to start with a couple kind of larger statistics just to get us grounded in what this means. Domestic gun violence really is we abbreviate it DGV, and you'll be seeing a lot of these slides that I'm pulling from are from presentations that we did on our special report on domestic gun violence. So all of this is available on our website, and I'll be sharing links and QR codes at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to see copies of this, we have full recordings. You can see our full data report, but we know that access to a gun increases the risk of intimate partner homicide 500% in a domestic violence home. We also know that 63% of women killed with a gun are shot by an intimate male partner, and 2/3 of intimate partner homicides are committed using a firearm. And importantly, where we're going with this legislation is really the intersection of not just domestic gun violence, but specifically addressing it through an order of protection. And we know that there are national studies that have looked at this. One of them found that domestic violence homicides among victims who had an order of protection, 1/5 were killed within 2 days of an order of protection being issued, and about 1/3 were killed within a month. So again, that is a national report that looked at survivors who were obtaining an order of protection and then looking at the risk of homicide after leaving a violent relationship, and where those stats come from. We also know that survivors are more likely to live in a home with guns than members of the general public. Survivors who experience gun violence are also more likely to experience post-traumatic stress disorder than other survivors, and survivors of color are substantially more likely to be impacted by gun violence. For example, Black women face 5 times greater risk of domestic gun violence homicide during pregnancy and postpartum than white women do. And so in our report that we launched earlier this year, which was a direct reflection of our work in trying to pass Karina's bill, but also to bring more attention to this intersection of domestic gun violence, we came up with this heat map looking at where domestic gun violence shootings occurred across Illinois in 2023. And in 2023, there were 109 domestic gun violence shootings in the state. And you can see that there are counties where we don't actually have any reported domestic gun violence shootings. But in the counties where there are shootings, we know that there are a number of shootings and that they can be really lethal. We also know that the concentration of incidents in some of the state's counties really focus on, the densest population center. So looking at Cook, Lake, and Will, but we know that this has a lasting impact in all of our communities. And here you'll see a trend graph of growth in the fatality of domestic gun violence. So we saw a 27% increase from 2022 of the total number of incidents. So when we talk about incidents, we're talking about domestic gun violence incidents. And this is a 63% increase post-pandemic, pre-pandemic from 2019, excuse me. And we did do a 2024 trajectory of where we expect to be. So right now on this graph, what you're seeing is total deaths at 93 deaths in 2023, and total injuries is that pinkish purple line, and then overall incidents. And this data is taken from the Gun Violence Archive, which is the data source that we used for this report, where we were looking at trends in domestic gun violence throughout Illinois, broken down by county as well, and kind of looking at the response at the Supreme Court level and the Rahimi decision, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, and then, naming Karina's bill as a solution. So I just wanted to give a little bit more context of kind of where we are in Illinois and what we can, before I talk about what we can do to solve this problem. Oops. Okay. And then what accounts for the increase in fatalities? You'll see that in 2023, there were 71 victim deaths. This is overall an increase from prior years. And we're looking specifically at victim death and also at suspect death. And if you look at the report does talk a lot about how, unfortunately, a lot of these incidents result in suicide from the suspect. And so a lot of the suspect death is actually them then going on and committing suicide after murdering their partners or their family members. And so we know that without intervention, we expect these numbers to just continue to increase. So just to lay the groundwork before I dive into Karina's bill and kind of the substance of why we're here today, I wanted to briefly emphasize the history of gun regulation and domestic violence in this country. And I'm not going to go through each of these kind of Supreme Court cases in depth, but this is just to give you a general overview. But the Lautenberg Amendment was passed in 1996, and it prohibits gun owners, if convicted of a domestic violence misdemeanor or subject to an order of protection, from having firearms. So this is existing law at the federal level. This is also existing law in Illinois. That is why when you get an an emergency order of protection, that person's FOID card is automatically suspended. But that is kind of the groundwork of where we are working off of right now. And then we get to 2008 with the District of Columbia and Heller Supreme Court decision, which kind of changed the way that lower courts had to evaluate gun regulations and the way that states were doing gun regulations in this country. And the two-pronged test that they came up with was a historical analysis, so looking at in the time, for just lack of a better word, in the time of the founding fathers, would this meet historical analysis view? So would the law that you're considering proposing or the law that's currently on the books be considered in that historical analysis? Would it be a real law that would be on the books and enforceable then? The second piece is a means and scrutiny test. So looking at, is the government reaching kind of their goal, and what is the weighing of options that they're considering in infringing on someone's rights versus getting to the goal of public safety. And so domestic gun regulation passed that test. So the Lautenberg Amendment passed the 2008 test. And then we get to New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin. And that again was a reevaluation and changed the test of how we have that two-pronged test from Heller. It's now a one-part test, and that is a historical analysis test, looking at, again, in the time of kind of the founding fathers, would this kind of hold up, and would it have been the law of the land back then? And that is when you see the challenge in the United States v. Rahimi case come into play. Domestic violence gun regulations came into question in the Fifth Circuit based on kind of the decision in 2022. And we saw a case come out of Texas where the lower courts pretty much said, you know, this individual was subject to an order of protection. We don't believe that their gun rights should be called into question just because they're subject to an order of protection. And so thankfully, the Supreme Court did rule on the side of survivors, and we did have a very strong decision come out of that Supreme Court case this summer. And I think, you know, for a lot of the folks, especially for the League of Women Voters, participants and sponsors, you know, they've been very supportive, and we're very grateful for that support of Karina's bill. But there has, you know, a lot of our coalition partners have been like, what's going on with the bill? Well, we're waiting for this Supreme Court case because there was a lot of anxiousness in Springfield about kind of, can we really legislate around this when there is this big question before the Supreme Court about the intersection of domestic gun violence and orders of protection. And thankfully, as I said, we had a very favorable case come down this summer. And so we're full steam ahead on moving forward with Karina's bill. And so after the tragic death of Karina Gonzalez and Daniela Alvarez, we worked to introduce Senate Bill 2633 and the House version, House Bill 4469, in the Illinois General Assembly to tackle the issue of urgent firearm removal as part of an order of protection when there's a heightened risk of lethality to a survivor and or their children. And I think it's really important to emphasize that it's really that emergency nature that we're trying to get at in this bill. We know, and all of the data shows, that really the highest time of lethality for a survivor is when they make that decision to leave, or when they're in the process of leaving. Because a person that has been causing harm knows that they are losing that power and control over that other person. And so they kind of, will use any tools and tactics to keep control and keep that person with them in the relationship. And if that results in homicide, unfortunately, we do see that quite often. And so we're trying to really address the urgency and the risk of lethality when someone seeks that order of protection. And so here, I'd like to take a second just to talk about kind of prohibition without enforcement isn't enough. And what we mean by that is, as I said earlier, through the federal legislation, the federal law, the Lautenberg Amendment, and under current law in Illinois, someone's status as a legal gun owner is suspended when they're subject to an emergency order of protection. But their FOID cards and their firearms may never be removed or accounted for. And we found in a report that we published last year that across Illinois, 45% of ineligible FOID card holders had not accounted for their firearms and never completed a disposition record. And so when that emergency order of protection is entered, their FOID card is supposed to be suspended. And ISP, Illinois State Police, does suspend that FOID card. But that person then is given notice and they're given 48 hours to come into compliance with the law and fill out what's called a disposition record and kind of say, I'm going to transfer my firearms to my brother, my cousin, my friend, they're a valid FOID card holder. Here are the list of guns that I'm transferring over to their possession. But really there's no enforcement. And we see that in the number of disposition records that weren't ever even completed. We also know that in terms of domestic violence, when there is domestic violence going on in a family, in a household, that sometimes spans through the whole family. And so if I am an abusive partner, I may also be abusive to my parents. I may also be abusive to my cousin, or they might just enable that behavior from me because they don't know how to stop me. And so if I am transferring firearms to them, and we live in the same home, I still have access to them. And so, that's why it's really important that when we talk about the current law, it also allows someone to transfer their firearms to someone who lives in that same home with them. So if I live with my mom and, my FOID card is suspended, I no longer can have firearms, I can just transfer them over to my mother who may be a valid FOID card holder, and those firearms can still technically remain in my possession. And so what does Karina's bill do? Karina's bill would require firearm removal to occur during the service of an emergency order of protection when granted by a judge. So what do I mean by this? I mean that they are able to issue a search warrant or that they're required to surrender to law enforcement in that immediate time when law enforcement shows up to serve that order of protection. It also clarifies existing language in the statute, the current law, for a judge to issue a search warrant when granting the firearm remedy to make sure that there is consistent firearm removal and enforcement across the state. So to be clear, right now in our orders of protection, this is technically language that you find in the law. It is language that you find in orders of protection. But what we're seeing is that there's this ambiguity where some judges are granting it, other judges aren't. There's no kind of consistency. And so we want to make sure that no matter the courtroom you're in, no matter the judge you're in front of, if you're a survivor who can meet the standards under the law, you can be eligible for this kind of relief. Not a search warrant in every single order of protection. There are kind of different standards. So if you are able to meet that standard for a search warrant, then you can be granted it. If not, then it's a surrender order. We also are looking to close a loophole in the current statute by barring transfer of firearms, barring transfer of ownership of firearms when the firearm remedy is granted. So again, orders of protection are very comprehensive. Firearms are just one out of 18 options that survivors have. They're really intended to be trauma-informed one-stop shops for survivors. And so when a survivor is making that request for the firearms to be addressed and a judge grants that, what we're saying is someone shouldn't be able to just, transfer their guns to someone else. They actually have to surrender to law enforcement if law enforcement isn't going in and taking the guns already. And then finally, we're also adding dating partners and ex-dating partners to the list of petitioners in the Firearm Restraining Orders Act. And this is a completely separate law that we're touching here. And this is existing law that allows for civilians and law enforcement to petition. It's our red flag laws in Illinois. And we're just adding kind of a small definition change there to ensure that dating and ex-dating partners can access that firearm relief if there isn't a need for an order of protection. Support for the bill. I mean, I think this goes without saying, and I know that I'm in front of a pretty friendly audience here, but Karina's bill is in line with recommendations from national organizations like the Battered Women's Justice Project and Prosecutors Against Gun Violence. We know that most Americans, 81% of Americans, support laws prohibiting a person subject to domestic violence restraining order from having a gun during the duration of the order, which this law would just reinforce that. And 78.9% of Americans support laws that create temporary firearm removal mechanisms for individuals at risk of harming themselves or someone else. Support for Karina's bill. We have over 40 organizations endorsing and supporting the bill. We also, last time I checked, we had 23 co-sponsors in the Senate, and a version of the bill did pass the House of Representatives in the spring of 2023. And so right now we are focusing our time and energy in the Senate. How you can support Karina's bill. You can continue to support organizations like the League of Women Voters, and sign up for our action alerts, call your legislators, email them, ask them to call the bill up for a vote before the 103rd General Assembly convenes. I know you all are very aware that we just got out of a crucial election cycle, and so the 103rd General Assembly in Illinois will be convening after lame duck early next year, and we are asking legislators to move the bill before that is adjourned so that we can start the spring session with saying that Karina's bill is already on its way to the governor's office. And then if you're interested in any of the data points that I shared throughout the presentation today, looking at our special report on domestic gun violence, all of our charts and our analysis, I would encourage you to access our full reports. They're available for download on our website, and also sign up for our future reports, because it is a big piece of the work that my team and I do, is making sure that data around domestic violence, around sexual violence is readily available. We just launched our services edition looking at services provided throughout Illinois, and the impact that our non-for-profit organizations have in meeting survivors where they are. And that is what I have for you all today.
Thank you, Maralea. Appreciate it. So everybody knows why Maralea is doing this remotely, right? He's in Springfield advocating for Karina's law. So Karina's bill, but we want it to be Karina's law. So that'll take some time. This is a veto session, so it's a short legislative session. I think it's just 3 days this week and maybe 3 days next week.
Yep.
Maralea, correct me if I'm wrong. If there's an issue we're going to bring this back next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll continue to need the support of the League of Women Voters and others to continue to talk to their legislators to make sure that the bill passes and that we're able to make sure that survivors are safeguarded from domestic gun violence.
And so everybody knows the league signed on last summer to support this bill. So we are all behind this already. We just need to make it happen. So, Sarah?
Awesome. I'm going to drop my email in the chat. I do have to head to another meeting, but thank you so much for having me. If folks have questions, want to get more involved, please do not hesitate to reach out. And thank you so much for the invitation again, Jim.
Thanks, Maralea. Well, rooting for you down there.
Thank
Get it
you.
done.
Take care.
Remember how the computers work? There we go.
In this?
You can just use that.
Okay. Okay. Here we go. Hi, everybody. Are we ready to get started? Yes. Okay. And everyone can hear me okay? I have a teacher voice naturally, so I've declined the microphone. But if it gets uncomfortable trying to hear me, please let me know. I'm happy to switch it on and give it a try. So I'm calling today's presentation Gun Violence Prevention Advocacy. It's about much more than the guns. So I would like to make that message clear in the next 20 minutes. My dear friend Jim McGrath asked me to cover 3 broad themes. Number 1, to introduce myself and explain a bit more about my role as an advocate and a gun violence prevention specialist. He also asked me to talk about the very unique and outstanding, in my, if I do say so myself, Lake County State's Attorney's Gun Violence Prevention Initiative, which is the first of its kind in America, and I can't wait to tell you more about it. Jim also asked me to cover a description of the nonprofit organization that I co-founded at the end of 2023 called Safe Illinois. We are building a new type of advocacy organization for a new generation of leaders and legislators in Illinois. And I really appreciate the opportunity to tell you more about it today. And then I'm going to wrap up by really talking about my approach to advocacy, which I think of as reforming broken systems. What I'm really interested in is making systemic change. And I'm going to share with you over the next 20 minutes the ways that I try to do that. So with that, and then we'll hopefully have time for some questions and answers and a discussion, because that's my favorite part of presentations, is the back and forth with the people who are listening. So these are my 3 current roles. These are 3 titles that I hold right now. As Jim said, I'm currently chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative in the Lake County State's Attorney's Office, CEO and co-founder of Safe Illinois. And I was elected to the Lake County Board in 2022, and I was reelected last week. Really glad that's over. So now I don't have to run again for 4 years, but in 3.5 years, I'll be back asking for your support. So, oh no, not the league, as individuals, not the league's support. Yes. Okay, so I'm going to start with telling you about the Lake County Gun Violence Prevention Initiative. And before I do, I'd like to, actually, I think I'll go back and kind of give you a quick overview of my career since 2015. As Jim said, in 2015, that's when I met Jim. I founded the first Moms Demand Action Group in the northern suburbs. In 2017, I went on to become the organizer of the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition. And then a few years after that, I did a similar job, but for a national organization called Newtown Action Alliance. All the while, I was advocating as a resident. I had not yet been elected to elective office. I was advocating for the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative in the Lake County State's Attorney's Office. So the thing that I ask that you keep in mind as I go through my presentation is that I have always, for almost 9 years now, been simultaneously engaged at advancing gun violence prevention policies at the local, state, and federal levels. And all of that changed last week. And I will circle back with you on that in a few moments and explain what I mean. But I'm going to start with the changes we've made at the local level, which I couldn't be prouder of. What happened is in 2018, I was leading my Moms Demand Action Group members, but also the members of the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition in the effort to pass something called the Gun Dealer Licensing Act. That may sound familiar to some of you that have been around for a while. The purpose of the bill was to cut down on the flow of illegally trafficked firearms into which primarily affects our underserved communities in Illinois. Because I'm a former teacher and I wanted to understand the issue very well in order to educate my members and the members of the coalition so that I could better motivate them and teach them how to advocate. I started spending a lot of time on the south and west side of Chicago with people who do community violence intervention work. So sometimes these people are referred to as street outreach or violence interrupters. So these are people who are formerly incarcerated, formerly gang affiliated. They're from the communities where the violence levels are quite high, and they are the only ones qualified to do that work because they have credibility on the streets and they can help the people who are most in risk and at risk of committing gun violence find more peaceful ways to solve their conflicts. So I was so deeply inspired way back in 2018 by the work of particularly the staff at the Institute for Nonviolence Chicago and the Austin community that I thought we need to have something similar in Lake County. And I came to Lake County and started looking for people who might be doing the same type of work. And I found them, but unlike the folks in Austin and Back of the Yards and Englewood, the folks in Lake County did not have the support of the philanthropic community. The people doing that work in Lake County were paying for it out of their own pockets. And that is just an extraordinary thing. And I felt it was really wrong that they weren't getting the same kind of support when we have the same kinds of problems in Lake County. So I thought to myself, how can we get this funding for them? At the time, there was no public funding for this work. It was only coming from the philanthropic community. And I knew the folks doing this work did not have the bandwidth or the skills. They certainly had the capability, but not the time or the money to learn how to secure grants from private foundations, to build relationships and network with the philanthropic community. They didn't have those advantages the way the folks doing that work in Cook County did. But along the way, I was learning it's not enough just to address the issue of gun violence that happens every day in our underserved communities. We must also address its underlying root causes, one of the largest of which is inequities in our criminal justice system. So I'm always looking for ways to do two things at once, especially when I'm using taxpayer money. So I thought to myself, these violence prevention professionals who are paying out of their pockets to do this violence prevention work on the streets of Waukegan, North Chicago, Zion, and Round Lake, they can't get private funding. And again, there was no public funding back then, but a state's attorney could. So I went to my previous state's attorney, not the current one, but the one that held the role before Eric Reinhart, and I asked him for an Office of Violence Prevention in his office, and he was not interested. So I said to myself, I guess we need a new state's attorney. So that's when I approached Eric Reinhart, who had announced his campaign against his successor, and we mobilized grassroots, primarily gun violence prevention advocates in Lake County, and we saw Eric Reinhart elected in 2020, and within a week, he set out to build the gun violence prevention initiative with me. He was reelected last week, which is great news because it means the GVPI will live on. So here is the GVPI. What I've got here on this slide is a very simple graphic that I hope illustrates for you the network that we are building of support for people who are the most in risk and at risk of gun violence, but also for everyone else in Lake County who is at risk of gun violence. Our mission is to implement trauma-informed programs and foster collaborative efforts throughout Lake County that will reduce and prevent all types of gun violence by addressing the root causes. So the intervention piece, that's right here. That's what I was just referring to, the folks that are doing street outreach in our most underserved and vulnerable communities. And then we're also building out an ecosystem of support, including all of the resources that are available to people in Lake County. We have everything we need in spades in Lake County when it comes to great services in terms of mental health, behavioral health care, job training, educational opportunities to earn your GED, to engage youth. We have a great Veterans Assistance Commission in Lake County, one of the best in the country. And we also have the highest number of veterans in Lake County all over the state. We have more veterans living in Lake County than any other county, and we have the youngest population of veterans, which means they are most likely to be veterans of the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan. And the rates of PTSD, as I'm sure you're aware, are really high for people who were in those theaters. So we're seeing a huge problem with firearm suicide among our veteran population. And so part of the GVPI's mission is to work together with those who are supporting veterans in Lake County. And I'm really thrilled to say that within the Lake County budget for 2024, we've secured a permanent full-time firearm safety specialist for the GVPI. One of the things that person prioritizes is helping reduce the risk of firearm suicide among veterans. We also have a victim services division, as this is specifically support for people who are victims and survivors of gun violence. And then finally, this is the piece that I was referring to a few moments ago, and this is the part that makes us different than anyone else in the country. There are two things really that make us different. Number one, there are a total of 5 prosecutors' offices in the United States that have offices of violence prevention. 4 of them are in major cities. The 5th is in Lake County. We are the only one in a rural/urban area. We are also the only one that is building out this ecosystem of support that is not focusing only on addressing the acute problem of gun violence in our underserved communities, but we're building out a network of support and addressing all of the different types of firearm violence risk to anyone in Lake County. So that is certainly what makes it different. Finally, this is the piece that really sets us apart. And I'm trying to find the cursor, excuse me, there we go. So the restorative justice piece, one thing that keep in mind is please think about the fact that I think I've got the statistic right. Of all the prosecutors and attorneys general in America, think about that number. 50 are career defense attorneys. All of the rest are career prosecutors. That might not seem relevant when on the surface, but when you start to think about it, what that means is most of the state's attorneys in America have a mindset, my job begins after the crime has been committed. Because they've spent their entire career as prosecutors. They're staying in their lane, right? And that's why the previous state's attorney, when I brought him this idea, that's why he wasn't interested. He's not heartless. He thought, that's not my job. My job is to be reactive to crime. Eric Reinhardt is a career defense attorney, one of only 50 state's attorneys in America who is a career defense attorney. And that's important because he comes with the mindset, my job is to prevent the crime before it happens. And so that's what the GVPI is. It's an example of a proactive approach to committing violence rather than reacting. And so that is why the restorative justice piece is what really sets us apart, because we are not only making sure that everyone in Lake County who is at risk of violence gets services, but we're making sure those services are fast-tracked to the people most in risk and at risk of committing violence. So these are going to be the people who may or may not be gang affiliated in Waukegan, North Chicago, Zion, and Round Lake areas. But they are the people that are the most vulnerable, and they are the people for whom they most need the mental health, behavioral health services, the educational support, the job training. They are the ones least likely to be able to access it on their own. So through the GVPI, we're fast tracking, we're creating soft handoffs so that they can get access to all those services. But we're also in the restorative justice piece, making sure if they're involved in a non-violent crime only, then they are getting access to deflection and diversion programs, alternatives to arrest and incarceration. Before the GVPI was formed, before Eric Reinhardt became state's attorney, the overwhelming majority of people involved in our deflection and diversion programs that were for nonviolent offenses that could lead to alternatives to arrest and incarcerate, basically second chance programs. Until Eric Reinhardt and the GVPI came along, the overwhelming majority of the people in Lake County participating in those programs were white, and that did not match the level of people engaged in our criminal justice system. we have fixed that problem. Eric Reinhardt's approach and the GVPI. So what I want you to really focus on is the GVPI as an example of an intersectional solution to intersectional problems. So when I said at the beginning, when I named this presentation, gun violence prevention advocacy, it's about a lot more than just the guns. What I mean is we will never end gun violence in America until we address its underlying root causes, and they all intersect. So we have to stop putting Band-Aids on problems. We have to start addressing the underlying root causes. So I've got a lot more detail here on this next slide. I'm not going to go into it because I talked a lot about this already, but I assume these slides are going to be shareable to everyone participating. Yes. So I'd just like to reiterate that GVPI is an ecosystem of support for all of Lake County. That's what we're building out, and it's one of the ways we're different. We are so different, as a matter of fact, that we were invited to present. This is Director Tiara Lemon of the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative. We were invited to present to the National Association of County Board Members in February with the White House Office of Violence Prevention. So we're really proud of that. Nobody in the country is doing what we are doing. We're the first, but we will not be the last. Despite what happened last week, we will not be the last. Please remember the term White House Office of Violence Prevention. I'm going to mention it again in a few minutes. I'm also not going to go through this slide in any detail, but I just wanted you to see that it's here. The GVPI unveiled its first violence prevention plan for Lake County 2024. And you can take a look at that through the links in this slide. And also, I just want to highlight the work of the Lake County Peacemakers. This is a dream come true for me. Because years ago in 2018, when I left the city of Austin, determined to get community violence interruption program in Lake County, the Lake County Peacemakers is what I dreamed of, and it is today a reality. And I am here to tell you this is a fact. In 2024, firearm homicides in Lake County are down 40%. 2020. Thank you. So I know Jim, poor Jim, he's like, oh, just all night. I'll try to speed up. But that was really important groundwork. I wanted to go into a lot of detail about the GVPI, number one, because it's a great story, and I think we could all use a little hope right now. Those of us that care deeply about progressive reforms, but it's also a good foundation for the case I'm going to make for you about why we need a new type of advocacy organization for a new generation of leaders and legislators, and that's Safe Illinois. The purpose of Safe Illinois is to support not Band-Aid solutions to preventing violence, but solutions that are intersectional. So the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative is an intersectional solution to intersectional problems at the county level. We want to see intersectional solutions to intersectional problems at the state level, everywhere in Illinois. That's why one of our 6 legislative priorities for the 2024 legislative session is Karina's bill. Karina's bill is intersectional. It is not just a domestic violence bill. It is a domestic violence bill, and it is a gun safety bill, and it also improves the firearm restraining order. So it is doing many things at once. And so Karina's bill is one of our top priorities. But I'm going to step back for a minute and tell you a little bit about the mission of Safe Illinois. This is sort of one of our motivational quotes, or one of the quotes that we like to refer to, because it's kind of one of the foundational ideas that my co-founder, Chelsea Laliberte, and I had when we started. There comes a point where we need to stop pulling people from the river. We need to go upstream and figure out why they are falling in. And that is a quote by Desmond Tutu, the South African bishop and theologian and human rights activist that you're probably all well aware of. Too many advocacy organizations aren't focusing on why people are falling in. They're doing great work, but they're focusing on the end result. And that makes sense. That matches our political system, right? Representatives have to be reelected every 2 years. They want quick wins. They want things that they can pass relatively quickly and point to so that people will reelect them. Great. I want that work to continue, but we also need a new approach to advocacy. Not only do we need advocacy organizations that focus on intersectional solutions to intersectional problems, but we also need advocacy organizations that recognize the value not only of the money that they can raise for candidates, but also of they recognize the value of grassroots activism. So it's really those two things that drove us to create Safe Illinois. We want intersectional, thoughtful solutions to intersectional problems. We want to address the root causes of all types of violence, and we want the voices of grassroots activists to be at the center of the work. We do not accept a political system in Illinois where it's pay to play. You only get to have a say if you can donate tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to a candidate. That is no longer acceptable in a post-2016 world. This is we have an incredibly active, engaged, and committed grassroots advocacy community in Illinois, and they deserve to be heard. So we envision a state where all Illinoisans can survive, strive, and thrive. There are links here. Please check out our initial press release announcing our start a little over a year ago. Check out our website here, become a member here. I'm not going to go through every word here, but I'm just going to kind of highlight the focus areas. That these are the issues that we think of as root causes of gun violence. So if there are intersectional policy solutions that are being championed in Springfield that address one or more of these issues, then we want to help get them passed. Gun violence prevention and criminal justice reform, economic justice and sustainability, environmental justice and climate change, equality, equity, and human rights, mental health and suicide prevention, reproductive health care and maternal health, substance use, and harm reduction. We do this in three main ways. We educate ourselves and each other and legislators, and not both legislators and other elected and non-elected policymakers. We advocate and we legislate. So I'm going to move on to the next slide to sort of go into just slightly more detail so you can get a better picture of what we do day in and day out. We work with legislators to craft, pass, and implement state and local legislation. Local, like the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative. State, like hopefully Karina's bill. Excuse me, I got ahead of myself. We are building an advocacy community by recruiting and training a fleet of public health activists who know the facts and how to act. We're building a training suite. This is the educate part, to create scalable, easily accessible educational content that anyone can take and share with others anytime. And we're supporting political candidates that reflect our values by demonstrating a commitment to fixing broken, harmful systems and standing up for social justice and public health issues that affect the most vulnerable among us. We also are making a special point, and we have been doing so for several months now. We've started a series on emotional resilience for activists. And I would like to invite each and every one of you to join us this Friday on Zoom from 12 to 1 p.m. It's totally free. Dr. Margaret Henderson is a psychologist, author, and speaker with 2 decades of experience in coordinating political volunteers across local, state, and national campaigns. And she, for several months now, has joined us for a series of sessions where we can reflect on and build our own emotional resilience. And I don't know about all of you, but I am really looking forward to the election debrief and burnout care. This is completely free. Please join us. The registration information is here. I think we all could use a safe place to sort of unpack what's happened recently within the last week or so. And that brings me to sort of the final point that I wanted to make. Everything that I've done, and if you kind of think back to that first slide where I shared all of my current roles with you, it's all connected, right? So I started the first Moms Demand Action Group. I realized I had some of the most dedicated volunteers and they weren't going anywhere. Exhibit A is Jim McGrath, okay? I said, those voices deserve to be heard in Springfield. So I got a job organizing grassroots activists across the state. We passed the original firearm restraining order, several bills to strengthen it in the years since. We passed gun dealer licensing. We passed the 72-hour waiting period. We passed the assault weapons ban in Illinois. I did the same thing at the national level. Organized volunteer grassroots activists from all across the country in order to pass what eventually became the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first federal bill in 30 years to be gun safety bill to be signed into law at the federal level. And we also advocated hard for much of those last 9 years for the first ever White House Office of Violence Prevention, which came to pass a little over a year ago. That it was the direct result of gun violence prevention activism over the last 10 years since Sandy Hook. The days of that office are numbered, and we expect it to be dissolved as of Inauguration Day. So what that brings me to is, and then running for office, right? I never intended to run for public office, but I realized I could make more systemic change from inside inside government than outside government. So what I'm interested in doing is making systemic change and making sure that we champion and keep at the center the voices of grassroots activists in everything that we do. But with the events of last week, what I've realized is that it's time to pivot, right? Instead of being focused at the state, local, and federal level, starting now, we have to pour our energies into securing the gains we've made locally and statewide here in Illinois. You're probably all familiar with the Electoral College results map. There was blue states on the East Coast, blue states on the West Coast, and Illinois. So as of now, this is my first event really since Election Day. As of now, all of my energies are going into continuing to protect and secure the changes that we've made locally. My dream now is to see all of the collar counties have offices of violence prevention in their state's attorney's offices, and then eventually to see them across the state. And my dream now is to double down on making sure that Safe Illinois is the best advocacy organization it can be, but one that goes way beyond the traditional model of just raising money for candidates. One that raises money for candidates, but also includes the voices and the wishes and the desires of grassroots activists that make up our membership, but also an advocacy organization that takes care of those members. We are a community of care, Safe Illinois, and we invite you to join us. I really hope you will. I didn't get through all my slides, but I wanted you, that's okay, because the main thing that like I said, there are two bills we're prioritizing. One is Karina's bill, and you already heard how to support that here. The other bill, another intersectional solution to intersectional problems, is the Strengthening Mental Health and Substance Use Parity Act. That is sponsored by Representative Lindsay LaPointe, who is a perfect example of the kind of legislator we want to support at Safe Illinois, because she is thoughtful and she is determined to do more than one thing at a time. So, for example, this bill will require insurance companies to cover mental and behavioral health care the same way they cover physical health care, and we intend to get it passed. I'm not going to go through these policy priorities, but there are 6. The two top are Karina's bill and the mental health parity bill that I just told you about. We are still quite hopeful that both of those will pass before the end of lame duck, and we're going to do everything we can to support the network and all of our other partners that are working on those bills. This is information about the rest of our policy priorities. And you all should know, if you're not aware, we do not have a safe firearm storage law in Illinois. That is ridiculous. Because safe firearm storage is not a bipartisan issue. In fact, 4 counties, Lake, Will, Kane, 3 counties and almost a 4th,
passed a resolution calling on the General Assembly to pass a safe firearm storage bill in 2023. And in all three of those counties where it passed, it was unanimous. All of the Republicans voted in favor of a safe storage bill and wanting to see one passed in Springfield. The fact that we don't have one yet is ridiculous. So we are going to be pushing hard for that in the next legislative session, and we'd love you to join us because it's going to take all of us to get it done. And with that, I would love to have any questions if we still have time. Thank you.
Let me just say one thing.
Yeah, sure. One moment. I'm going to stop sharing here. Go ahead.
I want to thank Sarah and Maralea. You guys have just seen two of the icons in gun violence prevention in the state of Illinois. So we are so lucky to have both of them here. It took them all of about 2 hours when I asked them, would you guys present? They come back to me and said, yes. So they're both invited.
We are over time, but we're going to try and get a couple of Q&A questions in here. So those who are online, if you have to go with your other commitments, understandable. We are recording this. We are going to get a couple of Q&A questions here from in the room. Although I will say there was a quick one online asking if that election debrief will be recorded if they cannot make it.
Yes, we are planning to.
That's a yes. So SK, that election debrief will be recorded if you cannot make it. And then we'll move on to some more specific questions. Oh, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Great. And if anybody else has questions in the room or online, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or pass in your note cards up here. So one of the first questions we had was, these are alarming statistics of domestic gun violence against women. Why do you think this is not widely known or shared? She's not. Yeah, unfortunately, Marley is not here. If you would be so kind, Sarah.
Okay, great. Why is it not widely known or shared? I think one of the tough lessons of the last week is I do believe the media is fractured. That's not news to anyone, but I'd like to go a little step further than that. I think we're all, there are forces that are manipulating what we see and what we don't see, right? And I'm not saying that there are people out there specifically trying to block the information that Maralea shared with us and hide it from us. I don't think it goes that far, but I think, you know, what the events of the last week, there are many reasons why the election turned out the way it did, I believe, but I think one of them is that issue of our data is being mined and it is being used to divide us. And some people are seeing certain information and other people are seeing other information. And we're just beginning to understand how that is complicating all of our efforts to make positive change. I'm sure there are many people who didn't vote the way I did. You can probably guess how I voted. I'm sure there are many people who did not vote for president the way I did, who also would be horrified by the statistics that Maralea shared with us today, but they never hear them, right? Only we hear them, right? So not a very satisfactory answer, maybe that question, but I think it's why we need to double down on the local and state advocacy, because change starts at home, right? When we are trying to make change from the top down, it really doesn't work. It favors the people that have access to the power and the money and the technology. And we need to make change among our neighbors, right?
We'll be swapping here a little bit, which is a good segue into the next question. So are there other counties approaching Lake County to mentor them in implementing similar programs?
Yes, many, but none in Illinois.
That's very interesting. You'd hope that our neighbors would be the first to jump on it. Yeah, that's okay. Getting it implemented anywhere makes it more likely for it to spread. That's great. So there's a question here asking, so what happens now that a federal judge in Southern Illinois has declared that assault weapons ban is unconstitutional. So how do some of these gun laws interact with each other?
So none of us really know what the judges are going to decide to do, what the courts are going to decide to do, but I'm actually not losing a lot of sleep over that one because this is the second time a judge has tried to strike down Illinois' assault weapons ban, and the Supreme Court declined to hear the case. So I do think it will be overturned in the Seventh Circuit. Hopeful. If not, I'll probably come back to you in tears. So.
And then earlier we heard a lot of statistics about specifically domestic gun violence and women. And I know Maralea could probably answer this a little bit more accurately, but how many men, or what are the statistics around men who are killed in domestic gun violence? If you have any comments or stats on that.
Okay, don't quote me, but I'm going to get it. I can answer correctly and get it in the ballpark. I'm sure Maralea would be able to tell you exactly. I can't tell you exactly, but I do know that generally speaking, something like 1 out of every 8 domestic violence, for some reason that number sticking in my head, are domestic violence victims are male. So kind of ballpark answer there. So it's definitely a real thing. It's not error. And thank you for bringing it up into the person who asked the question, because it's not right that we forget to acknowledge the men who suffer from domestic violence. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for saying that, Jim. Exactly.
Just in case that didn't get picked up on the broadcast, essentially Karina's bill is gender neutral and it protects all victims of gun violence, not just women, but men as well. And then one other additional detail question that came in, which is, what is the penalty for someone who keeps their guns after their FOID card has been suspended? So
if Karina's bill is passed, or now?
Now, and if the bill is passed, if you could provide some detail.
Okay. I think I can respond to the first one, although Jim may actually be better at answering this than me. The first part I feel pretty confident in answering. There's not much of a penalty, right? If you're supposed to turn in your FOID card, you get a letter from IS, the Illinois State Police, and they ask you to turn it in. I believe there was a bill passed that tried to mitigate that. Jim, are you more familiar with this than I am? Sounds like maybe you are.
One of the issues that we don't do a good job supporting is supporting our law enforcement to go and take these guns away from the person who had their FOID card revoked. For example, just a few months ago, Sheriff Dart, Cook County Sheriff, there are over 80,000 FOID card holders in Illinois who have had their FOID card revoked and have not turned in their weapons. Why is that? Because he doesn't have the resources to go do it. We don't fund that. So we got to figure out, where do we put our money? I know a little while ago there was a question about defund the police. That was so wrong. We need to get involved with this.
Illinois or Cook County?
No, that's Illinois.
Actually, is it all right if I follow up on something Jim just said? He is correct that, what was the number? 85,000? 80,000 people are ineligible to have a firearm, but nobody's taking their guns away because we have not funded the police and made it possible for them. I would just like to let everyone know that a few years ago, there was a bill before the General Assembly that would have fixed that problem. And it had an enormous amount of support from grassroots advocates. At the time, I was working only on the side of violence prevention advocacy, the C3 side, so only organizing volunteers. I wasn't involved in raising money for candidates. And there was overwhelming support among the grassroots activists for this bill that would have made it possible to go after those 80,000 people who haven't. And this experience of this bill is why I started Save Illinois, because what it taught me is that it doesn't matter how many grassroots activists tell their legislators, we want this particular bill passed. If those activists can't one way or another also come up with money for those elected officials, then those elected officials aren't going to care. And they're only going to listen to the advocacy organizations that can give them money. Up until that point, I actually believed, if as an advocate, as an organizer, if only I work hard enough, if only I'm good enough at my job, we won't need money in politics. The story of that bill taught me that I was wrong. Because at the 11th hour, right before that bill was set to be voted on in Springfield, negotiators behind closed doors removed that requirement that would have allowed those 80,000 guns to be confiscated. And they changed the bill at the last minute so that it could be passed. They weakened it, took all the teeth out of it, and broke the hearts of the gun violence prevention grassroots movement in Illinois. That's when I knew we need a new approach. We need an approach to advocacy for gun violence prevention that is intersectional, that provides money for candidates who want to do the right thing, for candidates who really will champion bills like the Mental Health Parity Act and Karina's bill, and not just stick their name on it and then not do anything to help pass it. And then and this is the most important part, because this is what makes our democracy work, an advocacy organization that puts grassroots activist voices at the center of the work. Because if we can't figure out how to make our voices heard, right? Even if we can't give a candidate tens of thousands of dollars or write them a $4 million check, if we can't figure out in this country how to make that system work, then we're going to see more elections like the one we did. So thank you for letting me go a little deeper into that. It's an emotional week for me. Appreciate the, that was, what's the word? Generous of you to let me go.
No, thank you so much for sharing your time, your talents, and the work that you do every day. And thank you everybody for staying a little bit long to hear that. If you'd like to know more, certainly Sarah and Maralea has shared lots of different links and places you can find more information. Additionally, always the League of Women Voters Palatine, etc. has their current efforts as well to support Marlena's bill. So do look if you're interested in getting more involved. And certainly if you've been enjoying our Civic series and want to know more about what's going on in your local communities, you can join us for the next one in January 28th. So whatever the last Tuesday in January is, we'd love to see you here again in person or online as always. And once again, a big thank you for our speakers today, for Sarah and Maralea, and for Jim for organizing for